What happens when a wealthy wife invites her poor twin sister just to mock her, only to watch her own world collapse in front of flashing cameras? This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about power, cruelty, and the moment the tables finally turn. Stay with us till the end, because the last laugh isn't who you expect. The chandeliers glowed like captured stars, scattering light across polished marble floors and crystal glasses. Eleanor Locke moved through her mansion with the practiced grace of a queen surveying her kingdom. Every detail of tonight's dinner had been curated for effect. The imported roses, the silver cutlery, the musicians hidden behind velvet drapes playing low classical notes. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a performance. She paused in front of the long dining table, fingers brushing the edge of the immaculate linen. The staff scurried around her, adding final touches to the wine glasses. Eleanor's lips curved, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "Perfect," she whispered, though her tone was sharp enough to cut. Tonight was designed for one reason: to remind her twin sister, Lila, exactly how far apart their lives had grown. Eleanor had clawed her way into wealth by marrying Adrian Locke, a billionaire whose name alone commanded awe. Lila, by contrast, had remained ordinary, a schoolteacher, scraping by in a modest apartment, invisible to the world Eleanor ruled. And yet, it wasn't enough for Eleanor to know she had won. She needed her sister to see it, to feel it, to be crushed beneath it. When the ornate invitation was delivered, Eleanor imagined Lila's hands trembling as she opened it. She pictured the hesitation, the humiliation, the dread of stepping into a world she no longer belonged to. That image alone fueled Eleanor's satisfaction. As guests began arriving, Eleanor greeted them with air-kissed warmth. The men in tailored suits admired her jewels. The women in gowns complimented her taste. She was radiant, untouchable, or so she wanted them to believe. Beneath her composure lurked a restless hunger, a gnawing need to be validated over and over again. From the balcony above, Adrian descended, dashing in his tuxedo. He pressed a kiss to Eleanor's cheek, his charm polished for the crowd. "Everything looks flawless," he murmured. Eleanor tilted her chin. "Of course it does." But even as he smiled at the guests, Eleanor's eyes flickered toward the entrance. She wasn't thinking about Adrian's approval, or the glittering praise of their friends. She was waiting. At last, the butler opened the great oak doors. Lila stepped hesitantly into the golden light of the foyer. Her dress was simple, pale blue cotton against a sea of silk and sequins. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair neatly pinned but unadorned. She clutched a modest purse, her fingers white from gripping it too tightly. Gasps whispered through the room. A few women smiled thinly, pity disguised as politeness. Eleanor's heart leapt, not with shame but with triumph. "Sister," Eleanor purred, sweeping across the room with outstretched arms. "You came." Lila managed to smile, though her eyes flickered at the stares around her. "You invited me." Eleanor's voice dropped low enough for only Lila to hear. "And you accepted. How brave." She pulled her sister into the room, parading her before the crowd like a curiosity. Guests offered perfunctory greetings, their eyes sliding back to Eleanor for cues. The twin contrast was stark: wealth and modesty, diamonds and plain fabric, power and vulnerability. As the music swelled, Eleanor guided Lila to her seat at the long table, deliberately placing her beneath the harshest chandelier light. "Everyone should see you," she said sweetly, her grip tightening for a moment on Lila's shoulder. Lila sat, silent, her hands folded. She didn't argue, didn't resist, but her stillness carried weight, a quiet strength Eleanor mistook for weakness. Around them, glasses clinked and laughter rose. Eleanor basked in it, reveling in her illusion of control. Yet behind her poised smile, insecurity gnawed, because no matter how much wealth she displayed, no matter how cruelly she mocked, she couldn't shake the shadow of being equal once, of sharing the same face with the woman she now tried to diminish. The performance had begun. But neither sister knew how dark the play would become. The chandelier's light shimmered across Eleanor's flawless smile. But Lila's silence at the dinner table tugged her mind backward, back to the years before money, before power, before betrayal. Two sisters, two mirrors of the same face. Yet from the beginning, their paths diverged. As children, Eleanor and Lila were inseparable. They shared a tiny bedroom in a crumbling house, whispering dreams beneath threadbare blankets. Lila's dreams were simple: to teach, to live honestly, to build something with her own hands. Eleanor's were larger, louder. She wanted to be seen, admired, envied. When Lila sketched stars in her notebook, Eleanor circled them and declared, "We'll own the sky one day." But life pressed them differently. Their father left early. Their mother stretched herself thin, working long hours to feed them. Lila learned patience, helping with chores, caring for their mother. Eleanor learned resentment. She hated hand-me-down dresses, the pitying glances at school, the way her twin accepted struggle as though it were noble. By their late teens, the contrast was stark. Lila studied late into the night, determined to earn her scholarship. Eleanor, meanwhile, discovered the intoxicating power of attention. Boys bought her gifts. Wealthy families invited her to parties. Lila warned her quietly, "Be careful. Attention doesn't last," Eleanor laughed, brushing her off. Neither does poverty. The unspoken wound began there. Eleanor seeing Lila's integrity as weakness. Lila seeing Eleanor's ambition as betrayal. When Adrian Locke entered the picture, the split became permanent. He was older, charming, magnetic in his wealth. Eleanor met him at a charity gala she had managed to sneak into. Within months, she was swept into his orbit, plucked from modest obscurity into glittering wealth. Lila visited once, standing in awe of the mansion Adrian had given her sister. "You're lucky," Lila said softly, though there was no envy in her tone, only concern. "Not lucky," Eleanor corrected sharply. "Smarter." It was the last time they spoke without barbs. Years passed, the sisters drifting into parallel worlds. Lila struggled as a teacher, paycheck to paycheck, but she carried a quiet dignity. She found joy in small things: books, students who bloomed under her care, the freedom of choosing her path. Eleanor, meanwhile, became a fixture in society pages, photographed in couture, dining under chandeliers. Yet beneath the diamonds, her insecurity deepened. Every time she saw her reflection, she was reminded she shared her face with someone ordinary. Someone real. It was intolerable. And so Eleanor's cruelty took shape, not through direct confrontation, but through subtle humiliations. Invitations designed to highlight the gap between them. Remarks laced with venom disguised as compliments. And now, this dinner party. A stage for her to finally crush her sister under the weight of her curated life. Yet as she looked across the table that night, Eleanor misread what she saw. Lila, sitting quietly, seemed small to her. But beneath the stillness was strength Eleanor had long forgotten existed. The sisters had taken different roads, yes. Eleanor paved in gold, Lila carved in stone. But stone endures where gold can shatter. And in the collision of their worlds, one truth was certain. The past had not been buried. It had only been waiting. The dinner table glittered with silver and crystal, but in the shadows of that grandeur, another figure was already shaping the storm. Cassandra Vale had learned early that beauty could be a weapon if wielded with precision. Her emerald eyes, her perfectly sculpted smile, her air of effortless charm. None of it was accidental. She had built herself piece by piece, rising from obscurity into the gilded world where Adrian Locke reigned. To Adrian, Cassandra was an intoxicating escape. Where Eleanor was poised, controlled, and sharp with pride, Cassandra was supple, playful, and dangerously hungry. She had mastered the art of listening, of laughing at the right moment, of whispering words that made Adrian feel young again. In her arms, he wasn't a man chased by lawsuits and whispers of corruption. He was a king adored by a worshipful subject. But Cassandra's devotion wasn't to Adrian. Not truly. Her obsession was Eleanor. She had studied Eleanor's every move, every headline, every photograph splashed across society pages. To Cassandra, Eleanor was both idol and target, the woman she wanted to dethrone, the throne she wanted to claim. When she watched Eleanor glide through charity events in couture gowns, Cassandra didn't just envy her. She plotted how to wear those gowns herself. "You deserve better," she told Adrian one evening, her voice soft as silk while her nails traced his collar. "She only cares about power." "I care about you," Adrian smirked, pulling her closer. "You always know what to say." And Cassandra did. Her ambition was camouflaged as affection, her hunger disguised as love. Each time Adrian slipped deeper into her orbit, she tightened her hold, convinced that soon Eleanor would be nothing more than a discarded relic. Yet beneath her polished charm was venom. Cassandra mocked Eleanor relentlessly, even in her absence. Her beauty is fading, she'd say with a laugh. Her crown doesn't shine like it used to. Adrian, flattered and eager, never corrected her. The mockery fed his ego, allowed him to imagine that he was the one trading up. But Cassandra's fixation went further. She kept a private folder. Photographs of Eleanor, tabloid clippings, notes scribbled in the margins about her jewelry, her gowns, her mannerisms. To anyone else, it would look obsessive, disturbing. To Cassandra, it was strategy. She wasn't waiting just for Adrian's love. She was waiting for Eleanor's fall. At the dinner party, while Eleanor orchestrated her cruel show against Lila, Cassandra lingered at the periphery, unseen by most. She hadn't been officially invited. Eleanor would never allow such humiliation under her roof. But Cassandra had ways of slipping into places she didn't belong. Watching from the edge of the room, her lips curled in amusement. Eleanor thought tonight would cement her dominance, but Cassandra knew better. She's slipping, Cassandra whispered under her breath, sipping champagne with a predator's patience. And when she does, I'll be there. Her gaze lingered on Lila too, curious at the contrast between the twins. If Eleanor embodied everything Cassandra wanted to destroy, Lila represented something she couldn't quite define. Authenticity, dignity, the kind of strength that didn't come from diamonds. Cassandra dismissed it quickly. Integrity was useless in a world where power was currency. The music swelled, laughter echoed, but Cassandra's eyes never left Eleanor. In her mind, the future was already written. Adrian on her arm, Eleanor cast aside, the empire rebranded with Cassandra's face at its center. But ambition breeds blindness. What Cassandra couldn't see was that Eleanor's cruelty toward her sister, and Adrian's arrogance in flaunting his mistress, were laying the groundwork for something far more dangerous than scandal. For now, Cassandra thrived in the shadows. Her hunger sharpened, her confidence unshaken. She thought herself the mistress in waiting. What she didn't know was that she was also a pawn in a far larger game, one Eleanor and Lila were only beginning to play. Adrian Locke was a man who understood the art of illusion. To the world, he was the golden standard of success. A billionaire whose name appeared on hospital wings, whose speeches at charity galas were quoted in glossy magazines. Cameras adored him, painting him as both visionary and savior. At his side, Eleanor gleamed as the perfect wife, completing the portrait of wealth and stability. But behind the facade, Adrian was a predator. He had built his empire not on brilliance alone, but on manipulation. Deals sealed with handshakes in the daylight often had shadows trailing behind them at night. Bribes disguised as donations, silenced whistleblowers whose signatures were forced onto non-disclosure agreements. Investors who vanished after standing in his way. His charm was his deadliest weapon. With it, he disarmed regulators, wooed journalists, and convinced the public of his generosity. But at home, that same charm twisted into control. He reminded Eleanor often that she owed her status to him, that without his name she'd still be a nobody. When she challenged him, his voice was velvet-laced with steel. "Careful," he'd whisper. "You wouldn't survive a day outside this life I built for you." Eleanor knew fragments of his secrets. She had overheard late-night calls where Adrian's tone sharpened, dropping the polished accent he wore in public. She'd glimpsed folders locked away in his study, papers with numbers that didn't add up, and names that never appeared at their dinners. She carried suspicions like splinters, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore, but each time she asked, Adrian turned her doubt against her. "You always imagine the worst," he'd sigh, kissing her forehead with a counterfeit tenderness. "I protect us, Eleanor. You don't need to know how." She told herself she believed him. In truth, she feared what she might uncover if she pushed too hard. What Eleanor didn't know was how deep Adrian's corruption ran. Offshore accounts linked to shell corporations, land acquisitions tied to bribery and coercion, and darker whispers still, contracts with men whose power lay not in boardrooms but in alleys and backrooms, men who made problems disappear. Adrian kept those sins carefully buried. Even Cassandra, in her hunger, only saw what he allowed her to. She believed he would crown her queen, never realizing the throne itself was cracked. Yet Adrian wasn't invincible. For all his calculation, he carried one blind spot: arrogance. He believed his wealth made him untouchable, that regulators could be bought and enemies silenced. And he believed his wife, worn down by years of control, would never dare act against him. That night, as he raised his glass at Eleanor's dinner, basking in the admiration of guests, Adrian felt secure. He saw Eleanor at his side, Lila diminished under crystal chandeliers, Cassandra glowing from the corner. To him it was a tableau of triumph, but beneath the surface the ground was shifting. Eleanor's insecurities were sharpening into cruelty. Cassandra's ambition was tightening into obsession. And Lila's quiet stillness was not weakness but preparation. Adrian Locke remained the man in control, for now. But the empire he built on shadows was beginning to crack, and the secrets he thought buried would soon claw their way into the light. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, their golden light spilling across marble floors and gilded walls. The Locke mansion had never looked more extravagant. Laughter drifted like perfume, mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet tucked into the corner. Waiters glided between clusters of guests, trays heavy with champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. From the outside, it was the perfect evening, a celebration of wealth and refinement. But beneath the gleam, currents of tension swirled, silent and sharp. Eleanor stood at the head of the grand dining table, her gown a river of emerald silk that shimmered as she moved. Every gesture was deliberate, every smile calculated. This was her stage, and she was both hostess and queen. Her eyes, however, flickered often to her sister. Leela sat quietly among the guests, her simple dress pale against the brilliance surrounding her. She sipped her water, shoulders straight, her silence a shield. She did not flinch under the curious stares or the whispered remarks. Her presence was soft, but it unsettled Eleanor, as though a shadow had been cast across the performance she had orchestrated. Eleanor leaned toward the woman beside her, her voice smooth but loud enough to carry. "It's such a joy having my sister here tonight. She so rarely attends events like these. But then I suppose she isn't used to dining under chandeliers." The table chuckled politely, eyes darting to Lila. Lila lifted her gaze, met Eleanor's eyes, and gave a small smile. "Some of us prefer sunlight." The remark was simple, but its weight lingered. Eleanor's lips tightened before she laughed lightly, brushing it off. "Always so modest," she said, clinking her glass. "But I'm sure it's charming in its own way." Guests shifted, sensing the undercurrent but saying nothing. The music swelled, filling the silence Eleanor left behind. In the shadows near the entrance, Cassandra observed. She had slipped in unnoticed, dressed in crimson satin that hugged her frame like liquid fire. She sipped her champagne slowly, her eyes fixed on Eleanor. From this distance, she could see every flicker of irritation, every mask Eleanor wore as she tried to keep control of the evening. "Your crown is slipping," Cassandra murmured into her glass, a smile curving her lips. As dinner was served, Eleanor continued her performance. She spoke of Adrian's latest philanthropic venture, of their travels, of the luxury she wrapped herself in. Each story carried a barb, a subtle reminder of Lila's humble world. "Do you still teach?" Eleanor asked sweetly across the table, her tone laced with condescension. "Such admirable work. Of course, the pay can't be much, but you must find it rewarding in other ways." Lila placed her fork down gently. "Rewarding enough to sleep at night," she replied. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the chatter like glass. A ripple passed through the table. Some guests hid their smiles behind their napkins. Eleanor's jaw tensed. Adrian chuckled, breaking the tension. "Always fiery, these sisters," he said, raising his glass as if to toast the spectacle. His eyes lingered on Cassandra for a fleeting moment before returning to his plate. Eleanor noticed. The flicker of attention unsettled her more than Lila's composure. Cassandra's presence was a silent threat, one Eleanor hadn't accounted for. Still, she pressed on. She couldn't let the evening slip from her grasp. "We should all be grateful for our blessings," she announced, her tone grand. "Some are fortunate enough to rise, others provide contrast." Her gaze lingered on Lila as the guests shifted uncomfortably. Lila's silence held. She neither rose nor broke. And that stillness, more than words, unsettled Eleanor most of all. From the shadows, Cassandra smiled wider. The dinner was turning into exactly what she had hoped for. A stage where Eleanor's cruelty would expose her own cracks. The night of glitter and champagne had begun, but the shadows were already lengthening. The clinking of cutlery against porcelain filled the silence between Eleanor's barbed comments and Lila's quiet replies. Guests leaned forward slightly, sensing the evening was veering from polite conversation into something sharper. Eleanor, basking in their attention, decided to push further. She lifted her glass, eyes sparkling with feigned warmth. "Isn't it remarkable?" she said loudly enough for the entire table to hear. "How different two sisters can turn out. One finds herself blessed with fortune." Her gaze swept the chandelier-lit room before landing on Lila, and the other chooses simplicity. A few guests chuckled, though uneasily. All eyes shifted to Lila, who dabbed her lips with her napkin but offered no defense. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice now dripping with false sincerity. "Tell me, Lila, where did you find your dress? It's charming. Vintage, perhaps?" The room stiffened. Everyone saw the dress for what it was, plain, modest, out of place among gowns worth fortunes. The remark wasn't curiosity. It was a dagger. Gasps fluttered down the table. A woman lowered her gaze to her plate. A man coughed into his napkin to disguise his discomfort. Lila straightened in her chair. She didn't blush. She didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, almost serene. "It's practical," she replied. "It's not meant to be remembered, just worn." Her words settled into the air like stone dropped into water, ripples spreading outward. For a moment, silence reigned. Eleanor's smile faltered, then sharpened again. She refused to yield. "Of course," she continued smoothly. "Not everyone needs to be seen. Some of us carry the burden of standing in the light. Others, I suppose, live more comfortably in shadows." The sting was clear. A few guests shifted in their chairs, exchanging looks of unease. Yet no one spoke against her. From the shadows near the doorway, Cassandra's lips curled into a predatory smile. She watched Eleanor slice into her sister with precision, yet she also saw what Eleanor could not, the cracks forming in her own mask. The cruelty was no longer elegant, it was desperate. Eleanor pressed further, unable to stop herself. "Do you still live in that tiny apartment?" she asked sweetly. "I imagine it must be cozy. Though surely you must envy spaces like this." She gestured around the opulent room, chandeliers blazing, marble gleaming. Lila's silence was her weapon. She didn't answer, didn't defend. She simply looked at her sister, her expression calm, almost pitying. That look unsettled Eleanor more than any retort could have. The guests whispered now, their unease growing louder. "She's being cruel," someone murmured behind a hand. Another shook their head. Eleanor raised her voice, desperate to reclaim their approval. "We all make choices. Some of us choose ambition, success, wealth. Others choose, well, smaller lives." Her laugh rang hollow, and this time no one joined in. Adrian cleared his throat, his smile brittle. "That's enough, Eleanor," he said softly, though his words carried weight. His eyes flickered toward Lila, then quickly away, as if acknowledging something unsaid. Eleanor's cheeks flushed, but she forced another laugh. "Just teasing. Sisters do that, don't they?" But the room wasn't convinced. The glamour of the evening had soured. The guests' admiration had shifted into discomfort, their glances darting between Eleanor's sharpness and Lila's quiet dignity. At the far end of the table, Lila lowered her gaze briefly, then lifted it again. Her silence was deliberate now, heavy with implication. It wasn't the silence of shame. It was the silence of someone who knew more than she revealed, someone who carried truths powerful enough to outlast her sister's cruelty. Eleanor didn't notice the shift. She believed she had won. But as the music faltered and the whispers swelled, it was clear to everyone else. The humiliation had not landed on Lila. It had landed on Eleanor. The tension in the dining room still hung heavy, the echoes of Eleanor's cruelty and Lila's quiet defiance refusing to fade. Guests whispered in low tones, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. The string quartet played on, but their notes felt brittle, like glass ready to shatter. Eleanor raised her glass again, determined to reclaim control. When the sound of the great oak doors creaking open cut through the air, every head turned, and there she was. Cassandra. She stepped into the room like she owned it, draped in crimson satin that glowed under the chandeliers. Her emerald eyes sparkled with calculated mischief. Her lips curved in a smile sharp enough to draw blood. But it wasn't her entrance alone that stole the breath from the room. It was the man at her side. Adrian Locke. Arm in arm, they crossed the threshold. Adrian's hand rested possessively on Cassandra's waist, his smile brazen, careless of the stares burning into him. Gasps erupted, followed by a wave of whispers that crashed across the table like thunder. Eleanor froze, her glass trembling slightly in her grip. For a moment she thought she must be hallucinating, that the humiliation she had inflicted on her sister had twisted itself into a cruel mirage. But no, Adrian was there, with his mistress on his arm, parading her into the very dinner Eleanor had designed to assert her dominance. Lila's eyes flickered briefly to Eleanor, then down again. She said nothing, but the silence itself was a blade. Guests shifted in their seats, caught between scandal and spectacle. Some watched with pity, others with hunger for the drama unfolding before them. "Is that?" someone whispered. "With his wife here?" Eleanor forced herself to stand. Her voice trembled as she tried to command the room. "Adrian, what is this?" Adrian smirked, unbothered. "Cassandra and I thought we'd drop by. It seemed rude not to." Cassandra's laughter chimed, cold and cruel. She leaned closer to Adrian, her voice pitched loud enough for all to hear. "We didn't want to interrupt, though it seems the entertainment started without us." The words landed like venom. Guests gasped, eyes darting between wife and mistress, waiting for the explosion. Eleanor's mask cracked. She set her glass down with deliberate force, her hands shaking despite her attempt at poise. "You dare bring her here?" she hissed. Adrian shrugged, his indifference cutting deeper than anger. "She belongs where I am." The betrayal was sharper for its publicity. Eleanor had mocked her sister, paraded her own superiority only to be humiliated before the same audience she sought to impress. The laughter she had tried to orchestrate was now turned against her, the spectacle she created collapsing in on itself. Cassandra tightened her grip on Adrian's arm, triumphant. "It looks like the queen has lost her crown," she whispered, just loud enough to ripple across the table. Eleanor's eyes burned, her composure unraveling. Around her, the guests leaned back, unwilling to intervene but unwilling to look away. The humiliation was complete, and it was hers. In the corner, Lila's silence deepened. Her sister's cruelty had backfired. Justice delivered not by confrontation but by exposure. Eleanor had set the stage for ridicule, and now she stood at the center of it, stripped bare. The evening had spiraled beyond repair. And in the shadows, Cassandra smiled wider, certain she had won. The room was still vibrating with shock after Cassandra's entrance. Eleanor sat rigid in her chair, humiliated, while Adrian basked in his mistress's presence, unbothered by the wreckage he had caused. Guests whispered, their voices weaving scandal into every corner of the dining hall. But not every guest was here for gossip. From the edge of the room, Detective Daniel Alvarez sipped his drink, his eyes scanning the chaos with clinical detachment. To the rest, he appeared just another guest in a dark suit. In reality, he was an uninvited observer, planted among the wealthy to follow the trail Adrian Locke had left across contracts and offshore accounts. Tonight he hadn't expected such a dramatic spectacle, but he welcomed it. Adrian Locke thrived on arrogance, Alvarez knew. Men like him always believed they were untouchable, but arrogance made mistakes, and mistakes left trails. Trails Alvarez had been chasing for months. His gaze shifted from Adrian to Eleanor. Her face was pale beneath the glow of the chandeliers, her pride shredded in front of her empire of guests. Yet it wasn't her despair that caught his attention. It was the calm stillness of the woman beside her. Lila. She hadn't risen, hadn't spoken, hadn't defended herself or her sister. She simply watched. Alvarez noticed the way her hands moved, deliberate, precise, as she pulled a folded envelope from her small purse and set it discreetly near her plate. Her eyes flickered toward him briefly, then away. Alvarez felt a jolt. It was the signal he had been waiting for. Later, when the music resumed and the crowd's whispers drowned into laughter again, Alvarez slipped away from the dining hall and into a quiet corridor. The marble walls muffled the noise of the party. Moments later, soft footsteps approached. Lila emerged, her pale dress ghostly under the dim light. She held the envelope in her hand. Her voice was steady, though her eyes carried the weight of years. "You've been watching him?" Alvarez nodded slowly. "And you've been keeping score." She extended the envelope. "I don't want his empire. I don't want her crown. But Adrian, her voice faltered before hardening, Adrian cannot be allowed to walk away untouched. Alvarez opened the envelope carefully. Inside were copies of receipts, photographs, and a ledger page Adrian would have killed to keep buried. His eyes flicked across them quickly and his pulse quickened. These were the pieces his investigation had been missing. The proof of laundering, the connection to shell companies, the undeniable trail of corruption. He looked up at her. "How long have you had these?"
"Long enough," she replied.
"Long enough to watch my sister mock me while I carried the one thing she didn't know I had." Alvarez studied her face. Unlike Eleanor, there was no vanity in her gaze, no hunger for power. Just a quiet resolve. "You realize," then he said carefully, "that once this begins, there's no stopping it. It will destroy him. And it may destroy her too." Lila's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then let it." She wanted me here tonight to be humiliated. Instead, she gave me the perfect audience. A silence stretched between them, heavy with consequence. Alvarez slipped the envelope into his jacket, his decision already made. Back in the dining hall, Adrian laughed too loudly at something Cassandra whispered. Eleanor sat stiff, her smile brittle, unaware that the ground beneath her was shifting. The power she believed she held was gone. In its place, her sister's silence had delivered the weapon that would unravel everything. And for the first time that night, the balance of the room shifted, not toward Eleanor, not toward Cassandra, but toward Lila. The fallout began quietly, an article buried in the business section, a whisper on late-night television. But by morning, the whispers had become a roar. Adrian Locke under federal scrutiny. Evidence emerges of fraud and offshore accounts. The headlines spread like wildfire, each story feeding the next. Photographs of documents leaked to the press appeared on screens and in print, the numbers impossible to ignore. For years, Adrian had been shielded by charm and money. Now the shield was splintering. At the mansion, Eleanor clutched a trembling glass of wine as she read the news. The words blurred in her vision, though their meaning cut with brutal clarity. It was Lila, she knew it. The sister she had mocked, paraded, humiliated. Lila had struck back with silence and precision. Eleanor's reflection in the mirror looked older than she remembered. Her crown of wealth and influence was slipping, and there was nothing she could do to hold it in place. The dinner that was supposed to showcase her dominance had instead become the stage for her downfall. She had lost her dignity, her husband, and now her reputation. Adrian stormed through the house like a man possessed, barking into his phone, demanding loyalty from lawyers and allies. His mask of composure cracked with every passing hour. "Find out who leaked it," he shouted, his voice hoarse with fury. "Do you hear me? I want names." But behind the anger lay something far more dangerous, fear. He had weathered rumors before, but this was different. These files weren't speculation, they were proof. Cassandra watched from the shadows of the living room, her crimson nails tapping against a glass. The thrill she'd felt parading into Eleanor's dinner had long since faded. She had imagined herself the victor, standing beside Adrian as his empire shifted toward her. But now she saw the cracks spiderwebbing across his life. "You'll fix this, won't you?" she asked one evening, her tone sharp, betraying her unease. Adrian didn't answer. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through headlines on his phone, his silence speaking louder than words. Cassandra's stomach twisted. She had tied herself to a sinking ship. The man she believed untouchable now looked like prey, hunted from every angle. Meanwhile, Eleanor's humiliation deepened. Guests who once clamored for her invitations now declined politely, avoiding her like contagion. Socialites whispered behind closed doors, some even pitying her, others relishing the irony. She had mocked her twin to feel superior, and in doing so she had handed Lila the perfect opportunity to dismantle her world. For the first time, Eleanor understood the depth of her mistake. It wasn't just her reputation at risk, it was everything she had built her identity on. Without Adrian's empire, without the illusion of superiority, what was left of her? Across the city, Lila remained quiet. She did not gloat, did not appear on talk shows or in headlines. Her silence was a contrast to the chaos, and it only deepened the public's curiosity. Who was the sister behind the scandal? And why was she invisible while Adrian and Eleanor burned? The empire was cracking piece by piece. The mask Adrian had worn for decades was breaking. Shards falling for the world to see, and everyone closest to him, Eleanor, Cassandra, even Lila, would feel the impact. Rain streaked down the tall windows of the Locke mansion, smearing the city lights into trembling rivers of gold. The storm outside mirrored the chaos within. Reporters camped at the gates, Adrian raging behind locked doors, Eleanor pacing the grand hall like a trapped animal. When the butler announced Lila's arrival, Eleanor nearly laughed. Her sister, the one she had tried to humiliate, had come back voluntarily into this wreckage. Yet the laugh never made it past her lips. She was too exhausted, her once flawless mask fractured by days of scandal. Lila stepped into the hall, her modest coat damp from the rain, her hair pinned simply. She carried no entourage, no camera, no defense. Only herself. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor asked sharply, though her voice cracked. Lila's gaze swept the room, the toppled glass on a side table, the newspapers scattered across the floor, Adrian's furious shouts echoing faintly from upstairs. "I came because it's time," she said softly. "Time for what?" Eleanor snapped, folding her arms to hide the tremor in her hands. "Time for you to hear the truth." They stood in silence, the storm pounding behind them. Lila stepped closer, her voice steady. "All my life you've mocked me. For my clothes, my home, my choices. You paraded your wealth as though it made you superior, as though it erased the fact that we share the same blood, the same face." Her eyes glistened, but her words sharpened. "You treated me like a reminder of what you wanted to forget. But I was never weak, Eleanor. I just chose a different path." Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to retort, to spit another barb, but none came. Lila continued, "And while you spent years ridiculing me, I was watching, listening, collecting the pieces Adrian thought he'd hidden. The offshore accounts, the fake contracts, the men who disappeared after crossing him. I knew one day the facade would crack. And when it did, I wanted to be ready." Eleanor's breath hitched. You're the leak?" Lila nodded. "I didn't do it for revenge. Not entirely. I did it because Adrian has ruined lives. And you—" She paused, her voice breaking. "You helped him. Every dinner, every gala, every cruel laugh at someone else's expense. You stood by his side while he destroyed people, and you destroyed me in smaller ways every time you tried to make me feel small." The words landed like blows. Eleanor gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white. For years she had believed herself the victor, the twin who had climbed higher. Now she saw the truth. She had built her crown on sand while Lila had built something stronger. Integrity, resilience, justice. Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. "You don't understand. I needed this life. I couldn't go back to being nothing." Lila's expression softened just for a moment. "You were never nothing. You just couldn't see it." They stood face to face, mirrors of each other, one draped in broken wealth, the other in quiet dignity. The bond between them flickered, fragile. Betrayal and blood twisted together, impossible to separate. From upstairs came the crash of a door slamming. Adrian's fury rattled the house, a reminder of the storm still raging. Lila turned toward the sound, her jaw firm. "It's not over yet, but it will be soon." Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. She could only watch as her sister stepped deeper into the wreckage she had once called home. The reckoning had begun. The storm outside had broken by dawn, leaving the city washed clean, though the Locke mansion still trembled with the aftershocks of the night before. Adrian hadn't slept. He prowled his study like a caged animal, shredding papers, barking at lawyers over the phone, and swearing that he would crush whoever dared expose him. But the world had already shifted beyond his control. By noon, black SUVs rolled up to the mansion gates. Federal agents stepped out, their dark coats glistening in the weak sunlight. The media had been tipped off and cameras swarmed like vultures, lenses trained on the front doors. Eleanor stood frozen at the top of the grand staircase as the knock thundered through the hall. When Adrian opened the door, his smile was brittle, his charm useless. The lead agent's words were clipped and final. "Adrian Locke, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering." The clink of handcuffs echoed louder than the murmurs of the crowd outside. Adrian's face drained of color, his mask shattering at last. For the first time in years, he looked mortal, smaller than the empire he had built, smaller than the lies he had told. As agents led him down the marble steps, the flashes erupted like lightning. Journalists shouted questions. "Is it true you siphoned millions overseas? What about the missing contractors? Was your wife complicit? Eleanor gripped the banister, her nails digging into the polished wood. Each camera flash felt like a blade carving her humiliation deeper. She wanted to scream that she hadn't known, that she was a victim too. Instead, she stood there silent, watching as her husband, the man she had defended, flaunted, and feared, was shoved into a waiting vehicle like any common criminal. Across the street, neighbors watched, their expressions a mix of shock and satisfaction. The queen of their world was now nothing but another woman undone by scandal. And Cassandra? She was nowhere to be seen. The mistress who once basked in Adrian's shadow had vanished. Her crimson gowns and mocking laughter reduced to rumor. The tabloids no longer cared for her story. She was stripped of relevance, just another ghost in the empire's collapse. Eleanor tried to salvage her name in the days that followed. She called old friends pleading for support, but doors closed swiftly. Invitations stopped. Her phone rang less and less. To the public, she was tainted, an accomplice, or worse, a fool, a social pariah draped in jewels no one admired anymore. Meanwhile, the headlines grew merciless. Billionaire in chains. From philanthropist to felon. Each article carried photographs of Adrian being shoved into a car, handcuffs biting his wrists, Eleanor pale in the background. In the silence of her bedroom, Eleanor stared at her reflection. The woman who had once mocked her sister for simplicity now stood alone, stripped of power, her crown shattered, and somewhere beyond the walls of her crumbling empire, Lila's quiet justice continued to ripple outward. The mansion that once glittered with chandeliers and laughter now stood hollow, its marble halls echoing with silence. Outside, the gates were swarmed by reporters, their voices sharp, their cameras relentless. The Locke estate had become less a home and more a spectacle, a monument to scandal. Through the iron gates, Lila stepped onto the long gravel drive. She wore the same modest coat she had arrived in days earlier, her shoes splashed with rain from the night's storm. Unlike the guests who once paraded here, she carried no jewels, no designer gown, no mask to impress the world. And yet, as the cameras turned toward her, the lenses drank her in as though she were the story they had been waiting for all along. Miss Locke, did you know about the fraud? Were you part of the investigation? Did you give the evidence to the press? Their questions battered her like hailstones, but Lila didn't flinch. She walked steadily, her chin high, her silence louder than any denial or confession. The flashes illuminated her face, calm, resolute, untouchable. Above, on the balcony, Eleanor gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles blanched. She watched as the sister she had invited to be mocked now walked away as the victor. The irony burned through her chest like fire. For years, Eleanor had believed wealth was power, that diamonds shielded her from judgment, that chandeliers erased the past she shared with Lila. But now, standing alone in the ruins of her reputation, she saw the truth. Her crown was nothing but glass, shattered by her own cruelty. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, "This was supposed to be my triumph." But no one heard. Lila paused at the gates, turning for just a moment. Her eyes lifted to the balcony where Eleanor stood. The distance between them was more than physical. It was years of rivalry, cruelty, and unspoken wounds. For a fleeting instant, their gazes locked, mirror to mirror, twin to twin. Eleanor's lips parted as if to call out, to beg or to curse. But no words came. Lila gave the faintest nod, not of victory, not of revenge, but of finality. It was the nod of someone closing a chapter, leaving behind the wreckage that wasn't hers to carry. Then she turned, stepping through the flashing cameras and murmuring crowd. The gates closed behind her with a heavy clang, sealing her departure. Eleanor remained on the balcony, the cold wind tugging at her gown. She was still dressed like a queen, but without subjects, without a throne, without a kingdom, alone, stripped of everything except the memory of her downfall. Inside, the house creaked with emptiness. Adrian was gone, shackled by the law. Cassandra was forgotten, erased from the headlines. And Eleanor, once the orchestrator of humiliation, was left to choke on the silence of her own making. The laughter she had wielded as a weapon had turned against her. The last laugh was not hers. Down the road, Lila disappeared into the city, her modest silhouette swallowed by the crowd. She carried no crown, no riches, no spotlight, only dignity. In the end, that was enough. The story of Adrian Locke would live in scandal, of Eleanor Locke in shame. But of Lila? She would be remembered as the woman who endured, who refused to be broken, who let silence speak louder than cruelty. And in that silence, she walked free. She invited her sister to be humiliated, but in the end, it was her own crown that shattered. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks away in silence. If this story gripped you, subscribe for more cinematic true crime dramas where betrayal, power, and justice collide. A comment below. Do you think Lila truly won? Or did Eleanor lose herself long before this night? Don't miss the next story. Truth is darker than fiction.